Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I bought a set of keys from the dark web. They opened my neighbor's house. Okay, so this might sound totally insane, but bear with me. I've been a lurker here for years, and I never thought I'd be the one posting something like this. It all started a few months ago when I was messing around on the dark web. Yeah, I know, stupid move. I was just bored and curious, looking for something weird to break the monotony of my life. I found this site selling all kinds of creepy and illegal stuff. It was like a twisted version of eBay, but for psychos. Drugs, weapons, stolen identities, you name it. What caught my eye though was this listing for a set of old keys. The description was vague, but it promised something extraordinary. For some reason, my gut told me to buy them. I didn't even think twice. A week later, a small package arrived at my doorstep. It was just a plain brown box with no return address. Inside were these ancient-looking keys, all rusty and worn. There was a note too, written in this shaky handwriting. Your journey begins now. Be cautious. I felt a chill run down my spine, but curiosity got the better of me. I started trying the keys on every lock I could find. My house, my car, random padlocks, nothing. I was beginning to think I'd been scammed. Then one night, I was walking past my neighbor's house. Let me tell you about my neighbor. His name was Mr. Peterson, an old guy who lived alone. He was weird but harmless, or so I thought. I don't know what made me do it, but I decided to try the keys on his front door. To my shock, one of them fit perfectly. I felt a rush of excitement and fear. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned the key, and the door creaked open. The house was dark, except for a faint light coming from upstairs. I knew it was wrong, but I felt this inexplicable pull to go inside. The air was thick and musty, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. I moved slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I winced with every step. As I got closer to the light, I started hearing these low, muffled noises. They sounded like whispers, but I couldn't make out any words. I reached the top of the stairs, and the light was coming from a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and the whispers were louder now. My heart was pounding in my chest as I pushed the door open. What I saw will haunt me forever. The room was filled with old, dusty furniture, but that's not what caught my attention. In the corner, there was a large metal cage, and inside it was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She was gagged and bound, her eyes wide with terror. Her clothes were torn, and she had bruises all over her body. My stomach turned at the sight. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head, and everything went black. When I came to, I was tied to a chair in the same room. Mr. Peterson was standing over me, a twisted smile on his face. He was holding a bloody wrench, and I realized with horror that he had hit me with it. Curiosity killed the cat, he said, his voice cold and mocking. But you're not going to die. No, that would be too easy. You're going to suffer, just like she did. He gestured to the cage, and I could see the woman trembling. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way to escape. Peterson walked over to a table covered with tools, knives, pliers, things I didn't even recognize. He picked up a knife and turned back to me. I've been waiting for someone like you, he said, his eyes gleaming with madness. Someone who thinks they can meddle in things they don't understand. You want to play with fire? Fine, let's see how you like it. He started cutting into my arm slowly, savoring every second. The pain was unbearable, and I screamed, but the gag muffled my cries. I could see the pleasure in his eyes, and it made me sick. This wasn't just about inflicting pain. He enjoyed watching me suffer. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. Time seemed to blur together in a haze of agony. Eventually, he got bored and left the room, probably to get more tools. I struggled against the ropes, trying to free myself, but they were too tight. The woman in the cage was crying, and I felt a surge of anger and desperation. I had to save her. I had to get out of there. Somehow, I managed to wriggle my wrist free. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't care. I worked on the other ropes, my hands slick with blood. Finally, I was free. I stumbled to the cage and fumbled with the lock. My fingers were numb, and it took what felt like forever to open it. The woman collapsed into my arms, and I half dragged, half carried her down the stairs. We were almost to the front door when I heard Peterson's footsteps behind us. I turned, just in time, to see him lunging at me with the knife. I managed to dodge, and he stumbled, giving me just enough time to grab a nearby vase and smash it over his head. He went down, but I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. We ran out of the house and into the night, not stopping until we were several blocks away. I found a payphone and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. When they arrived, they found Peterson unconscious and arrested him. The woman and I were taken to the hospital. She was in worse shape than I was, but we were both alive. The police told me later that Peterson had been a suspect in several disappearances over the years, but they never had enough evidence to arrest him. Thanks to my idiotic curiosity, they finally caught him. I thought that would be the end of it, but the nightmares started soon after. I can't close my eyes without seeing Peterson's twisted smile, or feeling the pain of that knife cutting into me. The woman, her name was Emily, tried to go back to her life, but I don't think either of us will ever be the same. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers, just like the ones I heard in Peterson's house. I know it's probably my mind playing tricks on me, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that house. I still have the keys, hidden away in a drawer. I've thought about getting rid of them, but part of me is afraid that if I do, whatever's haunting me will get worse. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I had to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has an idea of what's happening to me. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Either way, I need help. I wish I could say things got better after Peterson was arrested, but that would be a lie. The nightmares were relentless, and I was barely sleeping. When I did manage to doze off, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and the sound of those damned whispers echoing in my ears. Emily and I kept in touch, trying to support each other, but it was clear she was struggling too. She moved to a different city, hoping a change of scenery would help. I stayed put, thinking I could tough it out. A couple of weeks passed, and I noticed something strange. Random objects around my house would be slightly out of place. A chair moved an inch to the left. A picture frame tilted at an odd angle, that sort of thing. I shrugged it off at first, blaming it on my frazzled mind, but then things started to escalate. One night, I came home from work to find the front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I knew I had locked it. I stepped inside cautiously, every nerve on edge. The house was silent, but the air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. I checked each room, my heart pounding, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I found a note on my kitchen table. It was written in the same shaky handwriting as the note that came with the keys. It simply said, "I see you." I felt sick to my stomach. Was Peterson somehow still tormenting me from jail? Or was this someone else? I decided to install some cameras around the house. I needed to know what was going on. For a few days, everything was quiet. Then I caught something on the footage that made my blood run cold. In the middle of the night, while I was sleeping, my bedroom door slowly creaked open. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, just watching me. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. The figure stayed there for what felt like an eternity before slipping back into the darkness. I rewound the footage and watched it over and over, hoping it was some kind of glitch, but it wasn't. I didn't sleep at all that night, every creak and groan of the house sending me into a panic. I showed the footage to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They said it was probably just a prank, or maybe even my imagination playing tricks on me. But I knew what I saw. Desperate, I reached out to a private investigator, hoping they could help. The investigator, a grizzled guy named Sam, agreed to take the case. He set up more cameras and even stayed in my house a few nights to see if anything happened. One night, I woke up to the sound of a scream. I bolted out of bed and ran to the living room, where I found Sam, pale and shaking. He pointed to the monitor, his eyes wide with fear. The footage showed the same shadowy figure, but this time, it was right next to my bed, just inches away from my face. It stayed there for a few minutes before vanishing. Sam quit the next day, saying he didn't want any part of whatever was happening in my house. I couldn't blame him. I felt completely alone and helpless. The whispers were getting louder, and I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Dark shapes darting away when I turned my head, fleeting glimpses of a figure standing in the shadows. I decided to do some research on the keys, hoping to find some clue about their origin. I scoured forums and dark websites, looking for any mention of them. Finally, I found a thread on a hidden forum that talked about cursed objects. One post described a set of keys eerily similar to mine. The user claimed they were ancient and held the power to open doors, not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual realm as well. According to the post, the keys were created by a cult that worshipped a dark entity. They believed the keys could open a gateway to another dimension, a place filled with unimaginable horrors. The cult used the keys in their rituals, sacrificing innocent people to appease their god. Over time, the keys absorbed the malevolent energy, becoming cursed. The more I read, the more terrified I became. It all sounded like some bad horror movie plot, but I couldn't deny the strange things happening in my life. I reached out to the user who made the post, hoping they could help. They responded with a warning: destroy the keys before they destroy you. I didn't know how to destroy them, though. They seemed indestructible. I tried everything, burning, smashing, even trying to melt them down, but nothing worked. The keys were as solid as ever, almost mocking me. One night, as I was lying in bed, trying to stay awake, I heard a noise from downstairs. It sounded like whispering, but this time it was louder, more insistent. I grabbed a baseball bat and slowly made my way down the stairs. The whispers grew louder with each step until I was standing in front of the basement door. I didn't even realize I had moved towards it. My hand was on the doorknob, turning it before I could stop myself. The basement was pitch black, but the whispers guided me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I could feel something watching me, its presence overwhelming. Then I saw them. The keys, glowing faintly on the ground. They seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I reached down to pick them up, and the moment I touched them, I was hit with a wave of images, horrifying, gruesome scenes of torture and death. I saw Peterson, but he was different, twisted and monstrous. I saw the cult performing their dark rituals, and I felt the presence of something ancient and evil. I don't know how long I was down there, but when I came to, I was back in my bed, drenched in sweat. The keys were on the nightstand, looking as ordinary as ever. I knew then that I couldn't escape them. They had chosen me, and there was no way out. I decided to move, hoping that getting away from the house might help. I packed up and left, leaving everything behind. But the keys came with me. No matter where I went, they were always there, a constant reminder of the nightmare I couldn't escape. The whispers follow me everywhere now, and I can't trust my own mind. I see things that shouldn't be there, hear voices that no one else can hear. I'm scared all the time, afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone. I don't know how much longer I can take it. If anyone has any ideas, anything that might help, please let me know. I'm desperate. I thought moving away would help, but it didn't. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. I found myself jumping at every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by an ever-present sense of dread. Emily called me one night, her voice trembling. She had been experiencing the same things, the whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. It was clear that whatever cursed the keys had latched onto both of us. We decided to meet in person, hoping that together we might find some answers. We chose a small town, far from our respective homes, a neutral ground where we could think clearly. When I saw her, I was shocked. She looked as haunted as I felt, dark circles under her eyes, and a nervous, jittery energy. We hugged awkwardly, both of us on edge. We spent hours talking, trying to piece together any clues. Emily told me about the strange dreams she'd been having, visions of the cult, the dark rituals, and a figure that seemed to be watching her. She described it as a tall, shadowy man with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. I realized it was the same figure I'd seen in my nightmares. We decided to visit a local library, hoping to find some historical records or anything that could explain the keys. The librarian was a kindly old woman who seemed eager to help. She directed us to a section on local folklore and occult history. We spent hours poring over dusty books and faded newspapers, looking for any mention of the cult or the keys. Finally, we found something. An old journal written by a man named Thomas Grayson. He had lived in the area over a century ago and had been an amateur historian and occult researcher. His journal detailed his investigation into a secretive group known as the Order of the Black Key. According to Grayson, the Order was obsessed with opening a gateway to another dimension, a place they believed held the power to grant immortality and untold knowledge. The journal described horrific rituals involving human sacrifices and dark magic. The Order's ultimate goal was to summon an entity known as the Watcher, a being of immense power and malevolence. Grayson believed that the keys were the key, literally, to unlocking this gateway. He had tried to warn the authorities, but no one believed him. Eventually, he disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and his journal was the only evidence left of his existence. Emily and I were both shaken by what we had read. It seemed too fantastical to be true, but it fit with everything we had experienced. We knew we had to find a way to break the curse, to stop the Watcher from taking over our lives. We decided to visit the last known location of the Order's rituals, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The farmhouse was a decrepit, rotting structure that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The air around it felt heavy, oppressive. As we approached, I could feel the keys in my pocket, almost vibrating with anticipation. The whispers were louder than ever, a constant maddening drone in my ears. We forced the door open and stepped inside. The interior was a nightmare of symbols, scrawled in blood on the walls, old rotting furniture, and a smell that made my stomach churn. We searched the house, looking for anything that might help us. In the basement, we found a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside was a makeshift altar, covered in dried blood and surrounded by strange, occult artifacts. In the center of the altar was a large, ancient book. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and diagrams. Emily and I struggled to make sense of it, but we eventually found a passage that seemed to describe a way to break the curse. It involved performing a counter-ritual, using the keys to seal the gateway and banish the Watcher forever. We gathered the necessary materials, candles, salt, and a ceremonial dagger we found among the artifacts. We followed the instructions carefully, drawing a large circle on the floor and placing the candles at specific points. As we began the ritual, the air grew colder and the whispers reached a fever pitch. Shadows danced around us, and I could feel a presence watching us, growing angrier by the second. We recited the incantations, our voices trembling but determined. The keys glowed with a sinister light, and I could feel their power thrumming in my hands. As we reached the final part of the ritual, a deafening roar filled the room, and the Watcher appeared before us, a tall, shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a grin that sent chills down my spine. The Watcher moved towards us, but we stood our ground, finishing the incantation. There was a blinding flash of light, and the figure screamed, its form disintegrating before our eyes. The keys grew cold and lifeless in my hands, their power seemingly drained. We collapsed to the floor, exhausted and shaken. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive presence had lifted. We had done it. We had broken the curse. Emily and I left the farmhouse, burning it to the ground as a final precaution. We parted ways, each of us hoping to rebuild our lives and leave the horrors behind. The keys, now just ordinary pieces of metal, were buried deep in the woods, never to be found again. But even now, as I try to move on, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me. The shadows seem darker, the nights colder. I don't know if we truly defeated the Watcher or if we simply delayed the inevitable. All I know is that the keys brought something into our lives that can never be fully erased. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers. I tried to get back to a normal life after that night. I really did. But the trauma lingered like a shadow, and every small noise in my house sent my heart racing. Emily and I stayed in touch sporadically, both of us trying to offer support, but we were both too broken to be much help to each other. A few months after the ritual, I started noticing something odd. It began with little things, objects I was sure I had placed somewhere suddenly appearing in different spots. At first, I chalked it up to my frazzled mind, but then I began waking up in different rooms of my house with no memory of how I got there. One night, I woke up standing in my kitchen, staring out the window into the dark backyard. The keys were there, glowing faintly on the windowsill. My heart nearly stopped. I knew I had buried them in the woods miles away. I grabbed them with trembling hands and locked them in a safe, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. The whispers started again a few nights later, faint but unmistakable. They were no longer the background noise I had grown accustomed to, but insistent, urgent. I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder each night until I couldn't take it anymore. I dug out the keys from the safe, hoping they would offer some clue, some way to end this once and for all. I went back to the library, combing through old records, desperate for any hint of what to do next. The librarian, the same kindly woman who had helped us before, noticed my distress. She asked if I was all right, and for some reason, I found myself telling her everything. The dark web, the keys, Peterson, the ritual. Her face grew pale, and she nodded solemnly. "You're dealing with something far beyond our world," she said, her voice trembling. "There are forces at play here that few understand. You need to speak with someone who has experience with these matters." She gave me the name of an old man who lived on the outskirts of town, a reclusive, eccentric figure known for his knowledge of the occult. His name was Elias. Desperate and with nothing to lose, I went to see him the next day. Elias lived in a ramshackle cabin surrounded by dense forest. He was a frail, ancient man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. I told him everything, and he listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You've tampered with powers you don't understand," he said finally. "The keys are not just tools, they are conduits. By using them, you have opened a door that cannot be easily closed." I asked him how to fix it, how to stop the whispers and the nightmares. He sighed, looking more tired than I'd ever seen anyone. "There may be a way," he said slowly, "but it is dangerous. The entity you call the Watcher is bound to the keys, but its influence has already seeped into your life. To truly banish it, you must confront it in its own realm." He explained that the keys could be used to open a gateway to the dimension the Watcher inhabited. Once there, I would have to destroy the source of its power. It sounded insane, but I had no other options. Elias warned me that few who ventured into that realm ever returned, and those who did were never the same. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, and trying to steel myself for what lay ahead. Emily insisted on coming with me, refusing to let me face it alone. We drove to a remote location Elias had specified, a place where the veil between our world and the other was thin. As night fell, we stood in a clearing, the keys glowing brightly in my hand. We recited the incantation Elias had given us, and a portal began to form, swirling with darkness and faint, eerie light. My heart pounded as we stepped through into a world that defied description. The air was thick and oppressive, filled with an unnatural cold. The landscape was a twisted version of our own, with warped trees and shadows that moved on their own. The whispers were deafening here, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We walked for what felt like hours, our senses overwhelmed by the alien environment. Finally, we reached a massive, crumbling structure, the heart of the Watcher's power. Inside, we found a large, ominous altar, covered in ancient symbols and surrounded by flickering shadows. The Watcher was waiting for us. Its form was more defined here, a towering figure of darkness with those hollow eyes and a grin that made my skin crawl. It spoke, its voice a distorted mix of whispers and growls. "You cannot defeat me," it said, its eyes boring into mine. "You are nothing but insects, trespassing in a realm beyond your comprehension." But we had no choice. We had to try. Emily and I recited the counter ritual, the keys glowing brighter with each word. The Watcher roared, a sound that shook the very ground beneath us. It lunged, but we stood our ground, finishing the incantation. There was a blinding flash, and the altar cracked, releasing a surge of energy that knocked us off our feet. The Watcher screamed, its form disintegrating before our eyes. The portal began to close, and we scrambled to get through it, back to our world. We collapsed in the clearing, the keys now lifeless chunks of metal. The whispers were gone, the air clear and still. We had done it. We had banished the Watcher, at least for now. Emily and I returned to our lives scarred but hopeful. The nightmares faded, and the shadows no longer seemed to watch us. The keys were buried deep, this time far from any place they could be found. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still wonder if we truly defeated the Watcher, or if we merely pushed it back, delaying its return. I hope we never find out. Life gradually started to return to normal for both Emily and me. The nightmares lessened, and the ever-present whispers that had once tormented us faded into a distant memory. We tried to reclaim some semblance of peace, but the scars ran deep. We both knew that our experience would never truly leave us. Months passed, and I found myself cautiously optimistic. Emily had even started seeing a therapist, which seemed to help her cope. I wasn't so lucky. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting. Every time I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye or heard a faint noise in the night, I feared the worst. One evening, I received a call from Emily. Her voice was shaky, filled with a dread I hadn't heard since the ordeal. She told me that she had been having strange dreams again. In these dreams, she saw the keys glowing and felt an overwhelming sense of being drawn towards them. I tried to reassure her that it was just trauma manifesting in her subconscious, but deep down, I was terrified that the nightmare wasn't over. A week later, I woke up to find a note slipped under my door. It was written in that same shaky handwriting. "It's not over." My blood ran cold. I knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. I called Emily, but there was no answer. Panic set in, and I raced to her apartment. Her place was eerily quiet. The front door was unlocked, and as I stepped inside, the faint scent of decay hit me. I found Emily in her living room, sitting in a chair, her eyes vacant. She was alive, but unresponsive, her body shaking slightly. On the table in front of her were the keys, glowing with a sinister light. I reached out to touch her, but the moment my fingers brushed her skin, I was hit with a vision. I saw the Watcher, its form even more twisted and grotesque than before. It had found a way back into our world, using the connection it had forged with us. It wasn't just a spirit, it was something far worse, something that had tasted our fear and would stop at nothing to consume us entirely. Desperate, I called Elias. His voice was grim when he answered. He told me that he had feared this might happen. The Watcher's hold was stronger than he had anticipated, and the ritual we had performed had only been a temporary fix. He instructed me to bring Emily and the keys to his cabin. He said there was one final ritual that might sever the connection once and for all, but it was incredibly dangerous. I managed to get Emily into my car, her vacant stare never wavering. The drive to Elias's cabin felt like a lifetime, the oppressive sense of dread growing with each mile. When we arrived, Elias was waiting for us, a look of determination mixed with fear in his eyes. He led us to a circle he had prepared in the woods, marked with ancient symbols and surrounded by candles. He explained that this ritual would force the Watcher to reveal its true form, and only then could we destroy it. But there was a catch. One of us would have to act as a conduit, allowing the Watcher to enter their body, giving it a physical form that could be defeated. I volunteered. I couldn't let Emily go through any more suffering. Elias began the ritual, chanting in a language that made my skin crawl. The air grew thick and cold, and the shadows around us seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. As the ritual reached its climax, I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. The Watcher's presence was overwhelming, a torrent of darkness and hatred flooding my mind. I could feel it trying to take control, but I fought back with everything I had. I could see Emily and Elias, their faces twisted in fear and determination. Suddenly, the Watcher's form materialized before us, a hideous amalgamation of shadows and twisted limbs. It lunged at Elias, but he stood his ground, chanting louder and holding up a talisman that seemed to repel the creature. Emily, now out of a trance, joined in, her voice adding strength to the incantation. I could feel the Watcher's grip weakening. With a final agonizing scream, its form began to dissolve, the shadows dissipating into the night. The pain in my body subsided, and I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence finally gone. Elias helped me to my feet, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Emily hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. We had done it. We had finally severed the Watcher's hold. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a fragile normalcy. Emily and I continued to support each other, knowing we had been through something that would bind us together forever. The keys were buried once more, this time in a location known only to Elias. He assured us that the ritual had destroyed their power, making them nothing more than relics of a dark past. But sometimes, late at night, I still find myself listening intently to the silence, half expecting to hear a whisper, half dreading that it might return. I don't know if we've truly rid ourselves of the Watcher, or if it's just biding its time, waiting for another opportunity. All I know is that we've survived something unimaginable, and for now, that's enough. We have our lives back, fragile as they may be, and we'll hold on to them with everything we have. The darkness may always be out there, but as long as we have each other, we'll face it together. I bought a USB drive from the dark web. It contained footage of my own death. I know. Buying anything from the dark web is asking for trouble, but curiosity got the better of me. I've always had a morbid fascination with the underbelly of the internet. I've read countless horror stories, watched all the documentaries, and still, there was a part of me that wanted to see it for myself. So one night, after a few too many beers and a particularly bad week, I decided to dive in. I had a bit of cryptocurrency saved up, mostly from dabbling in it. A few years back, when Bitcoin was still a novelty, navigating the dark web wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. There are guides for everything nowadays. After a couple of hours, I found a marketplace that looked interesting. It was filled with the usual illegal crap drugs, fake IDs, stolen credit card info. But what caught my eye was a section labeled mystery boxes. Most of these listings were vague: unclaimed storage unit content, random electronics, assorted collectibles. Then I saw one that stood out: USB drive, disturbing content guaranteed. The description was simple: for those with a strong stomach. Content is not for the faint-hearted. You've been warned. I'm not proud to admit it, but my heart raced with excitement. This was exactly the kind of thing I had been looking for, something to give me a real thrill. I paid the equivalent of $150 in Bitcoin and provided an anonymous drop-off address. Then I waited. A week later, a plain brown envelope arrived. Inside was a small unmarked USB drive. My hands were actually shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. I know how stupid this sounds, but it felt like I was about to uncover some great forbidden secret. The drive contained one folder, labeled simply, "Watch Me." Inside, there were several video files, each named with a date. The earliest was from a few years ago. The most recent was dated just 2 days prior. I started with the oldest one. The video quality was surprisingly good. It showed a dimly lit room, probably someone's basement. There was a man tied to a chair, blindfolded and gagged. He was shaking and sobbing. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. A figure in a mask appeared on screen, holding a knife. What followed was, well, let's just say it was every bit as disturbing as promised. The masked figure didn't just kill the man. He took his time, drawing out the process in the most grotesque way possible. The sounds, the blood, the way the man's body jerked and spasmed. It was almost too much to handle, but something was off. As horrified as I was, a part of me was trying to figure out if this was real. The production quality was almost too good. Maybe it was some kind of sick movie. That's what I told myself as I moved on to the next video. The second video was more of the same. A different victim, but the same setup. As I watched, a cold realization started to creep over me. The room in the videos looked familiar. Too familiar. I paused the video and looked around my own basement. The layout, the fixtures, even the damn paint on the walls. It was a perfect match. No, I muttered to myself. This is insane. I forced myself to watch the remaining videos, each one more brutal than the last. The last video, the one dated 2 days ago, was the worst. The victim wasn't just killed. He was mutilated beyond recognition. But it wasn't the gore that disturbed me the most. It was the mask the killer was wearing. It was my mask, the one I used for Halloween last year. I was in full-blown panic mode now. My brain was screaming that this was some kind of elaborate prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I checked my basement again, looking for any signs that someone had been there, but everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the envelope the USB drive came in. There was a note inside that I had missed earlier. It read, "You're next." That's when I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from upstairs. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a rusty old wrench, and slowly made my way upstairs. The sound was coming from my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. With my heart pounding in my chest, I nudged the door open. My room was empty, but my laptop was on. I knew I had shut it down earlier. On the screen was a live feed of my own bedroom. The camera angle was from the closet. I felt my insides turn to ice. Someone was in my house, watching me, and I had no idea where they were. Then I saw it. The closet door slowly creaking open, revealing a figure in a mask. My mask. The last thing I remember was the feeling of something hard hitting the back of my head. Everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on my bedroom floor. My head throbbed with a pain so intense, it felt like my skull was being split open. I struggled to sit up, and when I did, I saw that my laptop was gone. The USB drive was gone too. My room looked like it had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, clothes strewn everywhere, but nothing else seemed to be missing. I tried to stand but stumbled, dizzy from the blow to my head. I made my way to the bathroom, using the walls for support. When I looked in the mirror, I saw dried blood matted in my hair and a nasty gash on the back of my head. I must have been out for hours. My first thought was to call the police, but then I remembered the videos. How could I explain those? They'd think I was involved somehow, maybe even the killer. I couldn't risk it. Instead, I cleaned myself up as best I could, bandaged my head, and went back to my room to assess the damage. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. My phone was on my nightstand, exactly where I left it, but the screen was shattered. I picked it up and tried to turn it on, but it was dead. It must have been smashed when I was attacked. I had no way of contacting anyone. Panic started to set in. I felt trapped, isolated, with no way to reach out for help. Then I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She was an old lady who lived alone, but she was always home and had a landline. I rushed over to her house, banging on the door like a madman. It took a while, but eventually she answered, looking concerned. "Dear, what happened to you?" she gasped, seeing the state I was in. "I was attacked," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to use your phone." She ushered me in, fussing over me like a mother hen. I dialed 911 and reported the break-in. They said they'd send someone over right away. While we waited, Mrs. Henderson made me sit down and gave me a cup of tea. I didn't have the heart to tell her that tea wasn't going to help with the kind of terror I was feeling. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, came in and took my statement. I told them about the break-in, the attack, but left out the part about the videos. They asked a lot of questions, and I could tell they were skeptical. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no clear motive. They said they'd investigate it, but I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was either lying or crazy. After they left, I went back home, feeling more alone than ever. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess and trying to think of what to do next. I couldn't stay here. That much was clear. Whoever had sent that USB drive knew where I lived, knew too much about me. I had to get out, but where would I go? That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every rustle of the wind sent me into a panic. I kept a kitchen knife by my bed, clutching it so tightly my knuckles turned white. But no one came. The next morning, I decided to check my email, hoping for some kind of clue. That's when I found a new message from an unknown sender. The subject line was simply, "Watch me." With trembling hands, I opened the email. There was a single link to a video. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The video started with the same basement room from the previous footage, the same masked figure, but this time the victim was me. I watched in horror as the figure dragged my unconscious body into the frame, tied me to the chair, and started the same horrific process I'd seen in the other videos. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This couldn't be happening. It was some kind of sick joke. But then, the figure stepped closer to the camera, and for the first time, removed the mask. I nearly threw up. The face staring back at me was my own. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. This was impossible. Some kind of deep fake, a nightmare? I pinched myself hard, hoping to wake up, but nothing changed. I was still there, in my room, with the image of my own face staring back at me, burned into my mind. I had to leave. Now. I threw some clothes into a bag, grabbed what little cash I had, and bolted out the door. I didn't have a plan, just an overwhelming need to get as far away from here as possible. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the masked figure following me. Paranoia gripped me. Every car seemed suspicious, every passerby a potential threat. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just needing to move. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop at a cheap motel. I paid in cash and didn't give my real name. Once inside the room, I pushed a dresser in front of the door and collapsed on the bed, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. That night, I had the worst nightmares of my life. I saw the masked figure, felt the knife cutting into my flesh, heard my own screams echoing in my ears. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, I knew I couldn't keep running. I had to find out who was doing this and why. The next step was clear. I needed help, but who could I trust? I woke up the next morning in the dingy motel room, my body aching from a night of restless sleep. The first thing I did was check my surroundings, making sure everything was as I left it. The dresser was still in front of the door, and no one had disturbed me in the night. I breathed a small sigh of relief, but knew it was temporary. I couldn't stay here forever. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, I sat on the bed and tried to think. I needed to find someone who could help me figure out what the hell was going on. My mind raced through a list of friends and acquaintances, but I couldn't think of anyone I trusted enough to drag into this mess. Then I remembered an old college buddy, Jake. He was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, always talking about the dark web and government cover-ups. If anyone could help me, it would be him. I managed to find a payphone outside a run-down gas station and called Jake. Thankfully, he picked up on the third ring. Hello? Jake, it's me, Mike. I need your help, man. It's urgent. Mike? Holy shit, it's been years. What's going on? It's a long story, but I'm in trouble. I think someone's trying to kill me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Where are you? I gave him the address of the motel, and he promised to be there within a few hours. I spent the time pacing the small room, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. When I heard a knock on the door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Mike, it's Jake. Open up. I moved the dresser and opened the door just enough to let him in before quickly closing and locking it behind him. Jake took one look at me and whistled. Damn, you look like shit. What the hell happened? I filled him in on everything. The dark web purchase, the videos, the attack. Jake listened, his expression growing more serious with each detail. This is some next level stuff, Mike. You're sure it's not just some elaborate prank? I wish it was, man, but it's real. Too real. Jake nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. All right, first things first. We need to figure out who's behind this. Do you still have access to the dark web marketplace, where you bought the USB drive? No, my laptop was stolen. Jake cursed under his breath. Okay, we can work around that. I've got a laptop in my car. Let's see if we can trace the transaction. We spent the next few hours diving back into the dark web, trying to find any clues that might lead us to the seller. It was slow, frustrating work, but eventually we found the listing. Jake managed to hack into the account's message history and found something interesting. Several conversations with other buyers, all complaining about similar experiences. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had received these horrific videos. Looks like this guy has been doing this for a while, Jake said, scrolling through the messages. But why? What's the end game? Before I could respond, Jake's laptop pinged with a new message. It was from the seller's account. Enjoying the show, it read. Jake's face went pale. He knows we're here. I felt my stomach drop. What do we do now? We need to keep moving. If he can track us here, he can track us anywhere. But at least now we know he's watching. We packed up and left the motel, driving aimlessly while we tried to come up with a plan. Jake suggested we go to a public place with lots of people, safety in numbers and all that. We ended up at a busy diner on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As we sat in a booth, nursing cups of coffee, Jake's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it and frowned. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a video from an unknown number." A chill ran down my spine. "Play it." Jake hesitated, then tapped the screen. The video showed a live feed of my house, the same basement room from the previous videos. The camera was focused on the chair in the center of the room. My heart pounded as the door in the video opened and the masked figure walked in, dragging a new victim. This time, it was Jake. "What the fuck?" Jake whispered, his face going white. We watched in horror as the masked figure tied the unconscious Jake to the chair and started the gruesome process we were now too familiar with. The real Jake across from me looked sick, his hands shaking. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "How can they know?" I had no answers, only fear. The video ended abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. "We need to get out of here," Jake said finally. "This guy isn't playing games. He's serious." We left the diner and drove to the nearest police station. It was time to come clean and hope for the best. We told the officers everything, even showed them the videos. They took us seriously this time, especially after seeing Jake's reaction to the latest video. They promised to look into it and offered us protective custody while they investigated. That night, we were put up in a safe house, a nondescript building with barred windows and reinforced doors. It felt like a prison, but at least we were safe, or so we thought. Just as we were settling in, the power went out. The backup generator kicked in, casting the room in an eerie red glow. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was another video. I didn't want to watch it, but I had to. The video showed the inside of the safe house, our current location. The masked figure was standing outside the door, holding a camera, waving at us. The timestamp on the video was current. "We need to get out now," I yelled. Jake and I bolted for the back door, but it was too late. The masked figure was already inside. He moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Jake and pulling him into the shadows. I heard Jake's screams echo through the house as I ran for my life. I managed to escape, but Jake wasn't so lucky. I found myself back on the streets, alone, hunted. I had no idea where to go or who to trust. All I knew was that the nightmare was far from over. I stumbled out into the night, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The streets were eerily quiet, and every shadow seemed to hide some new threat. Jake's screams still echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder that the nightmare was very real and very close. I needed to disappear, to find a place where no one could find me. The only option I could think of was an old cabin my family used to own up in the mountains. It hadn't been used in years, and I doubted anyone else knew about it. It was a long shot, but it was the only safe haven I could think of. I ditched my car a few miles out of town, fearing it might have been tracked, and began the long, arduous hike to the cabin. The trail was overgrown, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. I moved as quickly as I could, my mind racing with fear and paranoia. When I finally reached the cabin, it was nearly dawn. The place was run down, covered in dust and cobwebs, but it was secluded. I locked the doors and windows and collapsed onto the old, musty couch, too exhausted to think. I woke up several hours later, the sun high in the sky. My phone buzzed with notifications. I had a moment of panic, thinking it might be another video, but it was just news alerts and missed calls from unknown numbers. The world was still spinning out there, oblivious to my personal hell. I knew I needed help, but who could I trust? The police had been compromised, and Jake was gone. I decided to reach out to a hacker I knew from some forums I frequented, someone who went by the name Ghost. We'd exchanged messages a few times about cybersecurity, and he seemed knowledgeable and discreet. Using a secure messaging app, I sent a brief, frantic message to Ghost, explaining my situation without giving away too many details. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. "Meet me at the old train yard at midnight. Come alone." I had no other options, so I agreed. The train yard was about a mile from the cabin, and as night fell, I made my way there, sticking to the shadows. When I arrived, Ghost was already waiting. He was a tall, thin guy, dressed in black with a hood pulled low over his face. He nodded at me and motioned for me to follow him. We walked to an old, abandoned train car and climbed inside. It was set up like a makeshift office, with laptops, monitors, and cables strewn everywhere. "Show me what you've got," Ghost said, his voice low and serious. I handed him my phone and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he pulled up the videos and messages. After a few minutes, he leaned back and frowned. "This is bad, really bad. Whoever's doing this is a professional. They've covered their tracks well, but there are traces, small, almost invisible." "What do you mean?" "Look," he said, pointing at the screen. "This IP address. It's been masked, but not perfectly. I can trace it back to a specific server. It's risky, but it's our best shot." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Do it." Ghost worked in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up, a grim smile on his face. "I've got a location. It's an old warehouse downtown, but we need to be careful. Whoever this is, they're dangerous." We packed up and headed out, moving quickly and quietly. The warehouse was a looming, decrepit building surrounded by a chain link fence. We found a gap in the fence and slipped through, making our way to a side entrance. Inside, the place was dark and musty, filled with old machinery and broken furniture. We crept through the shadows, following the faint glow of a monitor in the distance. As we approached, we could hear the faint hum of electronics and the occasional click of a keyboard. Ghost motioned for me to stay back as he moved forward, his steps silent and deliberate. He peered around a corner and then quickly ducked back, his face pale. It's him, the guy in the videos. My blood ran cold. What do we do? Ghost handed me a small handheld camera. Film everything. We need proof. With trembling hands, I took the camera and followed Ghost as he moved forward again. We found a vantage point behind some old crates where we could see the figure hunched over a computer, his face obscured by the same mask from the videos. Ghost gave me a nod and I hit record. The figure seemed to sense something was wrong. He turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. Ghost took a deep breath and stepped out into the open. Hey, what the hell are you doing? He shouted. The masked figure froze, then slowly stood up. There was a moment of tense silence. Then he lunged at Ghost with a knife. I watched in horror as the two of them grappled, the knife flashing in the dim light. Ghost managed to disarm the figure, but not before taking a deep slash across his arm. Run! Ghost yelled at me. Get out of here! I hesitated, torn between helping him and saving myself, but the look in Ghost's eyes made it clear he was giving me a chance to escape. I turned and ran, the camera still clutched in my hand. Behind me, I heard the sounds of a brutal struggle, then silence. I burst out of the warehouse, my heart racing. I kept running until I reached a main road where I flagged down a passing car. The driver, a kind-looking middle-aged woman, stopped and let me in, her eyes wide with concern. Are you all right? What happened? She asked. Just drive, I gasped. Please, just get me out of here. As the car sped away, I looked back at the warehouse, knowing I'd left Ghost behind. I had no idea if he was still alive, but I had the footage. I had proof. I was determined to finish this, to expose whoever was behind these horrors. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. The woman who picked me up must have sensed the urgency in my voice. She didn't ask any more questions, just drove me to the nearest town. She dropped me off at a small diner and gave me a sympathetic look. Take care of yourself, she said before driving off. I stumbled inside the diner, my mind racing with everything that had happened. I needed to find a way to upload the footage I had and get it to someone who could help. I borrowed a phone from the waitress, a kind older woman who didn't pry, and called the only other person I could think of, my old friend Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was a journalist now, someone who might believe me and take this seriously. Sarah, it's Mike. I need your help. It's an emergency, I said, my voice shaking. Mike, what's going on? She asked, clearly confused. I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me? It's a matter of life and death. After a tense pause, she agreed to meet me at the diner. I hung up and waited, trying to calm my nerves with a cup of coffee. About an hour later, Sarah walked in, her eyes widening when she saw me. Mike, you look terrible. What happened? She asked, sitting down across from me. I quickly explained everything, showing her the footage on the camera. Her face went from skeptical to horrified as she watched. This is insane. But if this is real, we need to get this to the authorities, she said. They're in on it, I replied. I tried going to the police and they're compromised. We need to find someone outside the system, someone who can expose this. Sarah nodded, her journalist instincts kicking in. I know a guy who works for a major news network. He's always looking for big stories. If this doesn't qualify, I don't know what does. But we need to be careful. If these people are as powerful as you say, they'll be watching. We decided to head to a nearby city where a contact was based. Sarah made a few calls, arranging a meeting with him in a public place. We took a bus, hoping it would be harder for anyone to track us. As we arrived at the city, paranoia set in. Every person who glanced our way seemed like a potential threat. We reached the meeting spot, a crowded park, and found Sarah's contact, a middle-aged man with a serious expression. "Sarah, what's this about?" he asked. She handed him the camera. "You need to see this. It's huge." He watched the footage, his face growing more grave with each passing minute. When he finished, he looked at me. "This is serious. If this gets out, it'll be explosive. But you're right. We need to be careful. We'll start by making copies and distributing them to several trusted sources. That way, if anything happens to us, the story will still get out." We spent the next few hours in a small private office, making copies of the footage and sending them to various journalists and news outlets. The contact promised to start airing the story as soon as possible, using the footage as proof. Just as we were finishing up, the power in the office went out. My heart sank. It was happening again. We heard footsteps outside, and the door burst open. The masked figure stood there, flanked by 2 armed men. "Run!" Sarah's contact yelled, but there was nowhere to go. The masked figure stepped forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "You should have stayed hidden, Mike. Now it's too late." One of the armed men grabbed me, and I struggled, but it was no use. Sarah tried to fight them off, but they overpowered her too. We were dragged outside, into a waiting van. As the van sped off, I felt a sense of hopelessness. We had come so close, but it seemed like the end was inevitable. But then, something unexpected happened. The van screeched to a halt, and there was a loud crash. The door was yanked open, and I saw Ghost standing there, bloodied but alive. "Come on," he shouted. He had somehow tracked us down and staged a rescue. We fought our way out of the van, and Ghost led us to a nearby alley where a car was waiting. "Get in," he yelled, and we piled in, speeding away before the masked figure and his men could react. As we drove, Ghost explained how he had managed to escape the warehouse and track us down. He had seen the footage we sent out and knew where to find us. We drove for hours, making sure we weren't being followed. Finally, we reached a safe house, a real one this time, run by people Ghost trusted. We were safe, at least for now. The news network started airing the story, and the footage went viral. There was public outrage, and an investigation was launched. The masked figure and his associates were exposed and arrested. Their horrifying operation brought to an end. It took a long time for the dust to settle. Sarah's contact kept in touch, updating us on the progress of the investigation. The story became a national sensation, and the authorities were forced to clean house, rooting out corruption and complicity. But even as justice was served, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The nightmares continued, and I found it hard to trust anyone. Ghost and I stayed in touch, forming an unlikely friendship out of our shared ordeal. Sarah's career skyrocketed, but she never forgot what we went through. The USB drive was destroyed, but the memories lingered. I learned the hard way that some things are better left unexplored. Curiosity had nearly cost me my life, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. As I try to rebuild my life, I hold on to one lesson above all. Sometimes, the darkest corners of the web hold more than just secrets. They hold nightmares that can reach out and drag you into their depths. And some horrors, once unleashed, can never be truly contained. I found a dark web livestream that showed my family in peril. So, I guess I should start this by saying, I know I'm a curious person by nature, maybe even too curious. That's what led me to the dark web in the first place. I've always heard the stories, seen the YouTube videos about the weird, creepy stuff people find there. I never believed it could be real, but now I wish I had never doubted it. It started a few weeks ago. I was browsing through Reddit, reading all the horror stories and ARGs people were sharing, and I came across a thread talking about the dark web. Most of the comments were the usual warnings. Don't go there. You'll see things you can't unsee. That kind of stuff. But there was this one comment that stuck with me. It mentioned a site, a live streaming site, and said something like, "You'll find what you're looking for, but you won't like what you find." For some reason, that comment felt like a challenge to me. I won't get into the specifics of how I access the dark web. There are enough guides out there if you're really curious. I'm not here to teach you how to ruin your life. After a few hours of digging through random sites, I found the one mentioned in that comment. The site was plain, with just a black background and a list of live streams. Some of the titles were vague, like Room 42 or Uncle John's Basement. Others were more explicit, but I won't repeat those here. One title caught my eye, The House on Maple Street. It felt too familiar. I grew up on a Maple Street, but it's a common name, right? I clicked on it, half expecting to see a generic horror scene, like a poorly lit basement or a dark attic. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The stream showed my parents' living room, the same ugly green couch my mom refuses to get rid of, the same stupid ceramic cat my dad bought at a garage sale. I thought it was a coincidence, maybe someone else's house that just looked like mine. But then I saw my mom walk into the frame. She was holding a laundry basket, wearing that old faded robe she loves. I froze. This couldn't be real. I called my mom immediately. She answered on the second ring, sounding perfectly fine. I asked her what she was doing, trying to keep my voice steady. She said she was doing laundry. My heart was pounding. I asked her to go to the living room and wave at the camera. She laughed, confused, but did it. When she appeared on the screen and waved, I nearly threw up. This was real. Someone was streaming my parents' house live on the dark web, and I had no idea how or why. I told my mom there was a strange man outside our neighbor's house and asked her to call the cops. She seemed worried, but agreed, and I hung up. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what was happening. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure appeared behind my mum, dressed in all black, face covered. They moved so silently, so deliberately. My mom had no idea. I screamed at my computer, like she could somehow hear me. The figure raised a knife and I lost it. I called 911, yelling about a break-in at my parents' house. The operator tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stop screaming. I was helpless. watching this unfold from miles away. The figure just stood there, behind my mom, almost like they were savoring the moment, and then, as quickly as they appeared, they disappeared back into the shadows. My mom turned around, looking confused, but unharmed. She sat on the couch, oblivious to the danger she had just been in. The cops arrived a few minutes later, and I watched as they searched the house, finding nothing. My mom called me back, annoyed and scared, asking what was going on. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this? I stayed up all night, watching the stream, but nothing else happened. The figure didn't come back. My parents went to bed, and the house was silent. I was left with 1,000 questions and no answers. Who was that figure? How were they streaming my parents' house? And why? The next morning, I decided I needed to know more. I called in sick to work and started digging through the dark web again, looking for any clues. I found forums discussing the site, people sharing similar experiences, but no one had any real answers. It felt like I was chasing shadows. That's when I received the first message. It popped up on my screen, just a single line of text. Enjoying the show. My heart skipped a beat. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I waited, staring at the screen, but nothing else came. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just some sick prank. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Someone was watching me, watching my family, and they wanted me to know it. I couldn't tell my parents. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd be terrified. I had to handle this on my own. So I kept watching the stream, waiting for the figure to come back, but days passed and nothing happened. It was just my parents, going about their lives, unaware of the nightmare lurking in the shadows. Then one night, something changed. I noticed a new stream had appeared on the site. It was titled Maple Street, the basement. My heart sank. I knew what basement they were talking about. I stared at the new stream title for what felt like an eternity. Maple Street, the basement. It had to be my parents' basement. There was no mistaking it now. Someone had access to my parents' entire house, and I had no idea how. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the link, dreading what I might see. The screen loaded slowly, as if mocking my anticipation. When the video finally appeared, it showed the old wooden steps leading down to the basement. The lighting was dim, but I could make out the familiar details. The ancient furnace in the corner, the shelves cluttered with my dad's tools and old paint cans. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. As I watched, the camera panned slowly across the room, like it was searching for something. It finally settled on a dark corner, and that's when I saw it. A small door I had never noticed before. It was partly open, revealing only darkness beyond. My parents had lived in that house for over 20 years, and I had spent my entire childhood there. How could there be a door I had never seen? My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was another message from the same anonymous sender. "It's time to face your fears." I felt a chill run down my spine. What did they want from me? How were they doing this? I watched the stream, my eyes glued to the screen. The camera stayed fixed on the door, and after a few minutes, it started to move again. Slowly, deliberately, it crept closer to the door. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The camera passed through the doorway, and the screen went pitch black for a moment. Then a dim light flickered on, revealing a narrow stone-walled corridor. I didn't recognize this place. It didn't belong to my house, or at least it shouldn't have. The walls were damp, covered in some kind of moss or mold. The floor was uneven, and the ceiling hung low. It looked like something out of a horror movie. As the camera moved further down the corridor, I saw the first sign of something truly disturbing. Chains hung from the walls, rusted and old, but clearly used recently. There were dark stains on the ground, and my mind immediately went to the worst possible scenarios. Who had been here? What had they done? The camera continued its journey, eventually leading to a small, dimly lit room at the end of the corridor. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center, and what looked like fresh blood splattered on the walls. My stomach churned. I had to do something. I had to warn my parents. I grabbed my phone and called them again, praying they'd pick up. My mom answered, her voice groggy and annoyed. I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. Mom, listen to me. You need to get out of the house. Take Dad and leave right now. What are you talking about? What's going on? She asked, her voice rising with panic. Just trust me. There's someone in the house. You need to leave now. I could hear the fear in my own voice, and I hoped it was enough to convince her. There was a pause, and then I heard her call for my dad. I stayed on the line, listening as they moved around, getting ready to leave. My dad's voice came on the line, calm but serious. We're leaving. We'll call the police on the way. Stay on the phone with us. I breathed a sigh of relief. They were getting out, but as I watched the stream, my relief turned to horror. The camera in the basement panned back to the door and started to move up the stairs. It was like the person behind it knew exactly what was happening. Mom, Dad, hurry. They're coming upstairs, I shouted into the phone. I could hear my parents moving faster, their footsteps echoing through the house. The camera reached the top of the stairs and entered the living room, just as my parents rushed out the front door. I watched as they ran to their car, my dad fumbling with the keys in his panic. They got in and sped away, and I heard my mom telling the 911 operator about the break-in. The camera moved to the window, watching them drive away. Then slowly it turned and focused on the front door. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. The intruder was locking them out. They had full control of the house now. My phone buzzed again. Another message. You can't run forever. I felt a surge of anger. Who were these people? What did they want from us? I was determined to find out. I stayed glued to my screen, watching the stream as the camera moved through my parents' house, exploring every room like it was their own personal playground. They stopped in my old bedroom. I hadn't lived there in years, but my parents had kept it mostly the same. The camera lingered on my old posters, my childhood toys, the bed I used to sleep in. It felt like a violation, like they were digging through my memories. And then they moved to my parents' bedroom. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The camera focused on the bed, then the closet, then the dresser. They opened drawers, rifling through my mom's clothes and my dad's personal items. It was like they were searching for something specific, but I couldn't figure out what. The stream cut out abruptly, leaving me staring at a black screen. I waited, hoping it was just a glitch, but it didn't come back. My phone buzzed with another message. See you soon. I sat there, trying to process everything that had happened. My parents were safe, for now, but whoever was doing this was still out there, and they had made it clear they weren't done with us. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I had to go to the police, tell them everything, but I also knew I couldn't trust just anyone. Whoever was behind this had resources, connections. They had gotten into my parents' house without leaving a trace. They had set up cameras, and they were watching our every move. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to find out who they were and what they wanted. But most of all, I needed to protect my family. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. I spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment, trying to think of my next move. I knew going to the police was risky. Whoever was behind this clearly had resources, and I couldn't be sure they didn't have connections within law enforcement. I needed to gather more information before making a move. First thing in the morning, I called my parents to make sure they were okay. They were staying at a hotel, and my dad had already arranged for a security company to check the house. I didn't tell them about the basement stream or the hidden corridor. They were scared enough as it was. I took a few days off work and decided to stay with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do. I spent hours scouring the dark web, looking for any clues or similar stories. I found a few forums where people discuss creepy experiences and mysterious live streams, but nothing concrete. It felt like I was searching for a needle in a haystack. One night, I received another message from the anonymous sender. Enjoying the hunt? I replied immediately, demanding to know who they were and what they wanted. To my surprise, they responded, "You're asking the wrong questions. It's not about who we are, but why you." I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of their words. Why me? What did I have to do with any of this? Then it hit me. The hidden door in the basement, the narrow corridor. It had to be connected to my family somehow. There was something in our past that these people wanted. I called my dad and asked him about the basement. He sounded confused, but then he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. When I was a baby, my parents had hired a contractor to renovate the basement. The guy had been strange, a real creep, but he did good work. My dad said he always had the feeling the contractor had done more than what they paid him for, like he had some secret project. But my dad never found anything out of the ordinary, so he let it go. That had to be it. Whatever that contractor had done, it was still hidden in the basement, and these people wanted it. I had to find out what it was. I booked a flight home and arranged to meet my parents at the hotel. They were relieved to see me, but I could tell they were still on edge. The next day, we went back to the house with a security team. My parents stayed outside while I led the team to the basement. I showed them the live stream and the hidden door. They were skeptical, but they agreed to investigate. We descended the steps, and I felt that same sense of dread as before. The security team inspected the hidden corridor and the room with the chair. They found nothing out of the ordinary, no clues or hidden compartments. It was just an empty, creepy room. I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Maybe it was all just a sick prank after all. Then one of the security guys found something. Behind an old shelf, there was a small metal box, rusted and covered in dust. He handed it to me, and I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of old photographs and a journal. The photos were black and white, showing people in strange, old-fashioned clothes. The journal was filled with handwritten notes, detailing some kind of ritual or ceremony. It was all in a language I didn't understand. I took the box and thanked the security team. They said the house was clear, but I could tell they were spooked. My parents decided to stay in the hotel a while longer, just to be safe. I returned to my friend's place and started going through the photos and journal, trying to make sense of it all. The more I read, the more I realized this was something big, something dangerous. The journal described rituals involving human sacrifices and summoning dark entities. The photos showed these rituals taking place, with people standing in a circle, chanting and holding hands. In some of the photos, I recognized the basement from my parents' house. I felt sick. My family had been living above a dark secret all these years. But why were these people targeting us now? What did they want? My phone buzzed with another message. You're getting closer. Keep digging. I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. I took the photos and journal to a local historian, hoping he could translate the language and give me some context. The historian, a grizzled old man with a passion for the occult, took one look at the journal and paled. He said it was written in a dead language, used by an ancient cult that worshipped dark gods. The rituals described in the journal were meant to summon these gods and grant power to the participants. He warned me that if these rituals were performed correctly, they could have real dangerous consequences. I asked him about the photos, and he confirmed my worst fears. They were real, taken during actual rituals performed by the cult. The people in the photos were members of the cult, and the basement in my parents' house had been one of their meeting places. The historian said the cult had been disbanded decades ago, but it seemed someone was trying to revive it. I felt a mix of fear and anger. My family was in danger because of something that happened long before I was born. I thanked the historian and left, my mind racing with possibilities. Who were these people, and what did they want from us? The only way to find out was to keep digging, to uncover the secrets my family had unknowingly been living with for all these years. I returned to my parents' house, determined to find more clues. I searched the basement thoroughly, looking for anything that might give me more information. That's when I noticed something strange about one of the walls. It sounded hollow when I tapped on it. I grabbed a crowbar and started prying at the edges. After a few minutes of work, I managed to pull away a section of the wall, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was another journal, this one newer, with more recent entries. It detailed the history of the cult, their rituals, and their plans to revive the dark gods. It also mentioned a leader, someone who had been chosen to bring the cult back to life. My heart stopped when I saw the last entry. It was dated just a few weeks ago and mentioned my name. They were targeting me because they believed I was the key to completing their rituals. I had to warn my parents. I had to stop this. I called my parents and told them everything I had found. They were shocked and scared, but they agreed to help me figure out what to do next. We couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe us, and it was too risky. We had to take matters into our own hands. That night, I set up cameras around the house, hoping to catch whoever was behind this. I stayed up, watching the feeds, waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, I saw movement on one of the cameras. A figure dressed in black, just like before, was sneaking into the basement. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly made my way downstairs. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to face this head on. When I reached the basement, the figure was standing in the hidden room, chanting softly. I shone the flashlight on them and yelled for them to stop. The figure turned, and I saw their face for the first time. It was a woman, her eyes wild and filled with madness. She smiled at me, a chilling, sinister smile, and said, "You're too late. It's already begun." Before I could react, she pulled a knife from her belt and lunged at me. I dodged, barely avoiding the blade, and tackled her to the ground. We struggled, and I managed to knock the knife from her hand. She fought back with surprising strength, but I held on, determined not to let her win. Finally, I managed to pin her down and call for help. The security team rushed in, and they restrained her while I caught my breath. She kept laughing, a maniacal, haunting sound, and repeated, "It's already begun." I felt a sinking dread. What did she mean? What had already begun? As the security team took her away, I searched the hidden room, looking for any clues. I found a circle drawn on the floor in chalk, surrounded by strange symbols. In the center was a small blood-stained altar. The historian's words echoed in my mind. If the rituals were performed correctly, they could have real dangerous consequences. I had to find out what the cult was planning and stop it before it was too late. But I couldn't do it alone. I knew I needed help. I reached out to the historian and some friends who had experience with the occult. Together, we would uncover the truth and put an end to this madness once and for all. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a much darker journey. Gathering a team wasn't easy. I couldn't just ask anyone to join me in facing an ancient cult hell-bent on summoning dark gods. I needed people who could handle themselves and who believed in the supernatural. After a few days of frantic phone calls and cryptic messages, I managed to assemble a small group. The historian, my friend Jake, who had dabbled in occult studies, and Maria, a private investigator who owed me a favor. We met at a cafe, away from prying eyes and ears. I laid everything out for them: the journals, the photos, the hidden room in the basement. They listened, their expression shifting from skeptical to serious as I spoke. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Maria was the first to speak. "If what you're saying is true, we need to act fast. These kinds of cults don't mess around. If they've started the rituals, they won't stop until they've completed them." The historian nodded. "We need to find out what they're planning and stop it, but we need more information. The journals you found are valuable, but they're incomplete. There's more to this story, and we need to uncover it before it's too late." Jake looked at me, determination in his eyes. "We need to go back to the house, search every inch of it. There might be more hidden compartments, more clues, and we need to figure out who that woman was and what she meant by 'it's already begun.'" That night, we returned to my parents' house. My parents had reluctantly agreed to stay at the hotel a while longer, leaving the house empty and silent. We moved quickly and quietly, armed with flashlights and a renewed sense of purpose. The historian suggested we start in the basement, so we descended the creaky wooden steps once more. We spent hours searching, tapping on walls, and moving old furniture. The historian translated more of the journal entries, providing us with valuable insights into the cult's rituals and history. We discovered that the cult believed they could summon a powerful entity known as the Whisperer, a being capable of granting immense power in exchange for human sacrifices. As we continued our search, Jake found another hidden door behind an old bookshelf. This one was smaller, almost like a crawl space. He pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deeper underground. The air was damp and musty, and I felt a sense of dread as we crawled inside. The tunnel led to a large chamber, much older and more sinister than the hidden room in the basement. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, and the floor was littered with bones and decayed remnants of past rituals. In the center of the room was a massive stone altar stained with fresh blood. Maria took photos while the historian examined the symbols. "This is it," he said, his voice trembling. "This is where they plan to summon the Whisperer. We need to stop them before it's too late." As we explored the chamber, we found more journals and ritual artifacts. It was clear that the cult had been using this place for years, preparing for the day they could complete their ultimate ritual. But we still didn't know when or how they planned to do it. Then we found something that made my blood run cold. In a small alcove near the altar, there was a collection of photographs and personal items belonging to my family. My parents' wedding photo, my baby pictures, even recent snapshots of us at family gatherings. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They had been watching us for years, waiting for the right moment. Jake found a recent entry in one of the journals detailing the final steps of the ritual. It mentioned a specific date and time, just a few days away. The ritual required a significant sacrifice, someone connected to the original members of the cult. That's why they had targeted my family. They needed me. We regrouped and discussed our next move. We had to stop the ritual, but we also had to protect my parents. The historian suggested we perform a counter ritual, something to disrupt their plans and weaken their power. It was risky, but it was our best shot. The next few days were a blur of preparation. We gathered the necessary ingredients and tools for the counter ritual, studying the ancient texts and symbols. I barely slept, my mind racing with fear and determination. I had to save my family. I had to stop the cult. On the night of the ritual, we returned to the hidden chamber. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could feel the presence of something dark and malevolent. We set up our circle and began the counter ritual, chanting the ancient words and burning the sacred herbs. As we chanted, the air grew colder, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with an eerie light. The ground trembled, and I could hear whispers echoing through the chamber. The Whisperer was coming, but we were ready. Then we heard footsteps. The cult members had arrived, dressed in their dark robes and masks. They were chanting their own incantations, trying to summon the Whisperer. The leader, the woman from before, stepped forward, her eyes burning with madness. "You can't stop us," she hissed. "The Whisperer will rise, and you will all pay the price." We continued our counter ritual, our voices growing louder to drown out their chants. The chamber shook violently, and I could feel a dark energy swirling around us. The leader raised her knife, ready to complete the final sacrifice. But before she could strike, Maria tackled her to the ground. The knife clattered away, and they struggled fiercely. The cult members tried to intervene, but Jake and the historian held them back. I focused on the counter ritual, pouring all my energy into the chants. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. The ground split open, and a dark, shadowy figure began to emerge. The Whisperer was almost free, but our counter ritual was working. The glowing symbols began to fade, and the whispers grew fainter. With one final, desperate effort, I shouted the last words of the counter ritual. There was a deafening roar, and the chamber was engulfed in light. When the light faded, the shadowy figure was gone, and the cult members lay unconscious on the ground. We had done it. We had stopped the ritual and banished the Whisperer. But I knew it wasn't over. The cult was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they achieved their goal. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. We called the police, explaining the situation as best we could. The cult members were arrested, and the hidden chamber was sealed off. My parents returned home, grateful but still shaken. We decided to keep the events of that night a secret, to protect them from further danger. But I knew I couldn't rest. The dark web, the cult, and the whisperer, they were still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I had a feeling they weren't done with us yet. After the police arrested the cult members, things seemed to settle down, but the unease never left me. The dark web live stream was gone, but I knew better than to think we were safe. The leader's chilling words echoed in my mind. The whisperer will rise, and you will all pay the price. It was clear that the cult's mission wasn't over, and neither was mine. I couldn't let my guard down. I spent every spare moment researching, connecting with others who had encountered similar horrors. The historian Jake and Maria were my constant companions, their support unwavering. We knew we had to stay vigilant, to be ready for whatever came next. A few weeks later, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "It's not over." My heart pounded as I opened the message. It contained a single link, no text. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The link led to a live stream, just like before. But this time, it was my apartment on the screen. I felt the familiar cold dread creeping over me. They had found me. I quickly scanned the room, looking for hidden cameras. I found one in the corner of the living room, hidden in a vent. I ripped it out and smashed it, but the stream continued, showing the destroyed camera. A message popped up on the screen. "You can't hide from us." I called my team immediately. We met at a secure location, away from any prying eyes. Maria had traced the email to an IP address in the next town over. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead we had. We decided to investigate. We arrived at an old, abandoned warehouse. The place reeked of decay and neglect. We split up, searching for any signs of the cult. As we moved through the dark, dusty corridors, I felt a growing sense of dread. This place felt wrong, like the very air was tainted with evil. Jake found a staircase leading down to a basement. The air grew colder as we descended, our flashlights barely piercing the thick darkness. We reached a large, open space that looked like it had been used recently. The walls were covered in the same ancient symbols, and in the center of the room was another altar, this one much larger and more ominous than the one we had found before. We heard whispers, growing louder and more insistent. The whisperer was near. The cult was preparing for another ritual, and we were right in the middle of it. We had to act fast. We set up our counter-ritual, just like before, but the atmosphere felt different, more hostile, more powerful. Suddenly, the lights flickered on, blinding us. The cult members surrounded us, their leader standing at the front, the woman from before, her eyes burning with the same madness. She looked at me and smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" she taunted. "The whisperer demands a sacrifice, and we will deliver." Before we could react, they rushed at us. The historian and Jake tried to hold them back, but they were outnumbered. Maria and I focused on the counter-ritual, chanting as loudly and clearly as we could. The room shook with the force of the clashing energies, our chants battling against theirs. The leader raised her knife again, this time aiming at me. I braced myself, but Maria tackled her at the last second, knocking the knife from her hand. They struggled, and the knife skidded across the floor. I grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in my hand. The leader lunged at me, but I was ready. With all my strength, I plunged the knife into the center of the altar. There was a blinding flash, and the room was filled with a deafening roar. The cult members screamed, their voices blending with the whispers. The symbols on the walls glowed brightly before shattering, sending shards of light flying through the air. When the light faded, the cult members lay on the ground, unconscious, or worse. The leader was gone, vanished without a trace. The altar was cracked and broken, its power destroyed. We had done it. We had stopped the Whisperer. We called the authorities, who arrived and took the surviving cult members into custody. The warehouse was sealed off, and the ancient artifacts were confiscated for study. The historian assured me that without their leader and the altar, the cult was powerless. My parents returned home, relieved and grateful. We tried to move on, to return to our normal lives, but the shadow of those events lingered. I still kept in touch with the historian Jake and Maria. We had formed a bond through our ordeal, a bond that would never break. I knew we had won a significant battle, but the war against the darkness wasn't over. The world is full of hidden horrors, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. But now, I was ready. I had faced the abyss and survived. I knew what it took to fight back. Every now and then, I still receive messages, cryptic, ominous hints that the cult isn't entirely gone. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm prepared, and I know that as long as we stand together, we can face whatever darkness comes our way. The Whisperer had been banished, but the echoes of its malevolence would always be with us, and I would always be watching, waiting, ready to protect those I love from the shadows that lurk in the corners of our world.